Hi, everybody. It's Harvard Lawyer Lee. We are here with a very special guest, Justin Paperny, who is the YouTuber from White Collar Advice. We are going to be talking about the Todd and Julie Chrisley prison fiasco. As you know from watching this channel, Todd Chrisley was sentenced to 12 years in prison with 3 years supervised release, which is probation afterwards. Julie Chrisley was sentenced to 7 years with the same 3 years of probation afterwards. We are going to be talking to Justin, who has himself experienced all of these things. He is himself an ex-con and a felon. And let's just go ahead and tell him real quickly, Justin, about your path, why you went to prison, just real quickly, and then what it is that you do now.
So I went to prison in April 2008 for pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud. Essentially, at my sentencing hearing, Judge Wilson said I turned the other way for money. Most think a caught. I did. He was going to make an example out of me and send me to prison. And the reality of the situation didn't hit me until I surrendered to federal prison. And while there, I saw men scared to go home, scared about what awaited them on the other side of prison boundaries. So I sought to use my experience to be productive, to write, to contribute. And because of that hard work while in custody, upon my release, I began building White Collar Advice, which helps people traversing civil and criminal government investigations.
So, since you've actually been in the prison system, I think you're kind of the perfect person to answer some of the questions that everybody's been asking and wondering, especially about the Chrisleys. You've got people who are reality TV stars, they are celebrities, have had a very beloved 10-year run on their TV show, and they are extremely privileged. They've lived a very wealthy lifestyle, and suddenly life is going to be really different for them. For those of you who don't know, Todd and Julie were convicted of tax evasion and bank fraud. They're going to be spending their time, Todd in a low security and Julie in a minimum security prison. So let me just hit you right out of the box, I think, Justin, with some of the questions that people are asking. First of all, are Todd and Julie going to be treated any differently, either better or worse, because they're celebrities? What's going to happen to them that's different because they're celebrities? Anything?
Because they're celebrities, some staff who may be fans of theirs could look to cozy up to them and say, I'm a fan of yours. I'm sorry that you're here. I empathize with you. So because they're known and they may have fans, both with guard and staff, both with guards and their fellow prisoner, they need to address how they're going to respond to that. It was super easy for me to go to prison. Didn't nobody know me? But when you go to prison and people are expecting you, in part because prison can be a boring environment for some, they're looking for the new people. This shakes it up a bit. This is exciting. We are waiting for you. So they've got to understand that more eyes will be on them, and it's in their interest to learn the nuances of prison, the written and unwritten rules, because one mistake, associating with a staff member for 35 seconds too long can lead to a whole parade of horribles on the inside. So it's harder for them because they can be targeted and subjected to additional scrutiny because of their stardom. It's the reason they've got to prepare properly for prison. They should be doing that right now.
So when you say parade of horribles, like what?
Well, someone, I won't mention the name, but years ago, someone who was a high profile lawyer who served time in prison struck up a conversation with the guard for no good reason. And 35 minutes later or 40 minutes later, that guard was searching somebody's locker. So some prisoners either correctly or incorrectly deduced that wasn't that new guy over there talking to that staff member, and suddenly my locker's being searched. He's a snitch or a rat, to use some prison parlance. And just like that, this prisoner is ostracized. Nobody wants to bunk with him. Nobody wants to work with him. And what should have been a very low-key, easy term in a minimum security camp turned out to be problems by people thinking that he's an informant. Why? He felt the need to talk to the staff member about the San Diego Chargers moving to Los Angeles or some nonsense like that. He didn't understand his environment. There's myriad cases like that I could share, and can get much worse, including if someone thinks you're an informant. I know of situations where they'll put feces and urine in your pillow. I mean, it can be awful. Speaking to staff is a huge no-no, yet too many people, unfortunately, seem to do it.
So even, I think, more common as far as fears of prison, instead of being ostracized or being lonely, I think people fear think about violence and assault. In this particular case, the person who testified against the Chrisleys, who brought the case to the government, testified that he had had a year-long affair with Todd Chrisley. They had had an intimate relationship for a significant period of time. And so something that immediately I think people think about is there going to be some kind of consequence for Todd Chrisley? He vehemently denied that there was ever any such affair. He said that was false. The guy had it in for them and just came up with this. And so I have no idea whether it's true or not. He denied
So in a minimum security camp, there are scores of prisoners who cooperated and who say they didn't cooperate, but they did. So even the person who broke off, who started this investigation, who I think got a few years in prison, in a minimum security camp, he's not really going to face retribution for the cooperation. I want to be clear about that. If anything, some people may actually respect Todd Chrisley because he went to trial. Like, it takes a lot of courage to go to trial because the odds of prevailing are so low. So if anything, a number of the people there will respect and admire him for having the courage to go to trial, for not cooperating, for not taking a plea deal, for not rolling over on anybody else. So I don't envision violence for any of them. Now, in a low security prison where I know the informant or the one who started the investigation is not going, in a low security prison, they don't favor cooperators. They could actually come up to you and say, show me your papers, which is your probation report, because they want to see, one, are you a sex offender? And two, did you cooperate in a government investigation? Fortunately for this family, that's not anything they have to worry about because neither of them cooperated. They went to trial. So that's one thing going for them, I guess you could say.
And to be clear, the informant got immunity. So there's no jail time.
No jail time for him. Great. So
Yeah,
there you go. So, but even if you're right, even if he did go to prison, it would be a minimum security camp. So many of the people there cooperated. There's not any problems.
Oh, another thing I want to ask about is the Chrisleys still do live a very lavish lifestyle. You can see that in the show. They're really very funny. I have to say I really enjoy their show. But Todd, for example, talks about a face cream and moisturizer and is into sort of luxuries like that. Can people bring you those things in prison? Can you have your own stash? Is that a no?
Yeah,
all over for Todd?
That's a big negative. There'll be no keels on the inside. That much I can tell you. You're going to buy in the commissary where he'll have $360 a month to spend. You will buy lotion that looks like paste when it goes on. The sunblock is a whole nother story. If you can even get it on, some guys will say, I'll deal with the sunburn or skin cancer because I can't have this on my body. So the prison system cares about security, keeping costs down, and some of the items that you purchase in the commissary are not things that this family is used to purchasing. But you adjust, you get on with it. That's the way it goes. But no, people cannot send them to him. They cannot bring it to visitation. They cannot mail it to him. Now, there's a black market in prison, without question, where you can pay people to obtain these items for you. The prison hustle is alive and well in federal prison. But to your question, if they want to avoid problems and they want to go about it the right way, he's going to buy the cheapest lotion you could ever imagine.
Can people send huge amounts to your commissary account?
Huge mistake.
And send money?
Huge mistake if you owe money, right? If you owe restitution and you have a ton of money coming onto your prison books, you can expect your case manager to take a good portion of it. There's been a lot of attention to that by senators, and because R. Kelly, once convicted, they saw that he had like $38,000 in his commissary account. They're like, why does he have 38 grand? He has victims. They took it. So there's more attention being paid to victims' rights, as there should be. But if you have $500 or $1,000 coming in a month, you could expect them to take $200 to $300 of it for the victims. And I would encourage them not to complain, to not say, no, you cannot take it. No, I'm not going to pay it. Some do. It leads to problems. So whatever their case manager says they should pay, they should pay.
Now, you were in prison for 18 months, right?
Yes.
Less than that. You were sentenced to 18 months and served less than that.
13 months.
13 months. Okay. And the Chrisleys have been sentenced to a much longer time. Tell me about what you expect in terms of impact to their lives, to their families in a much longer sentence than the one you served.
Well, people learn to, it is a very long sentence. And initially there's a shock and awe of them not being there. And then in time, you really grow used to living without them. They'll form a visitation schedule maybe once or twice a month, depending on where what prison they're in the country. The family will get used to what time they're going to call every day. They'll be able to email every single day. People can download the Core Links app to access email on their iPhone. So they'll be very connected. But what I've learned from clients who have served 5 or 10 years in prison, they'll say, I don't want to forget about the outside world while I'm in prison. That is a strategy. There will be people telling them, forget about the outside world, live your life in here, let them live their life. We don't advocate for that, but they will form their own routine, and they'll develop just a daily routine that hopefully brings value to their life, and their family will develop a routine as well. In fact, we've been told with long prison terms, it's actually quite an adjustment to then suddenly go home and have them back, because many people change through a very lengthy prison term. You find new values. If they once valued expensive items and cars and jewelry and private jets, well, by virtue of their situation, they need to value new things. So they're going to come out immeasurably different. So through our work, we talk about this U-shaped curve, which is kind of a metaphorical U. You adjust in prison, you're scared, then you work your way down to the bottom of this metaphorical U. You're adjusted in prison. I own this environment. I got my job in my bunk. Then the anxieties pick up again as you ascend the U, as you get closer to your release date. We encourage people to begin preparing for this ascension of the U the day they get there. But to your question, families adjust without them, and then they adjust when they come home.
And I think it would not just be the people in prison who change, but it's also the people on the outside. Particularly here, you think of the fact that they have a 10-year-old daughter who will be 20 when Todd Chrisley gets out of prison.
Well,
And
I will tell you, the hardest part is teens in prison, 13, 14, 15-year-olds with all of these press releases and the fame. I've known of children at high school or middle schools who have taken the Department of Justice press release and posted it on the door and say, your daddy's a criminal. It's very iPhones. It's a simple Google search away to see that your loved one may be in prison. So I empathize with them, because the hardest is the 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 as we're developing. And it's a way for people unfortunately in this country, some people take pleasure in the pain of other people. It's a way for them to feel like, it just makes them feel good that other people are suffering. And unfortunately, some people may bring that out on the daughter, which makes matters worse. And that's what really complicates a prison term. If you're not there, when you're not being there to provide tutelage and mentorship and guidance, it's incredibly difficult, and you feel vulnerable and scared because you feel as if you have so little control. That will be the hardest part of them serving time.
so for the Chrisleys, they do have kids in that exact range. They have some older kids too, but
Mhm.
they have Grayson, who's 16, Chloe, who's 10, and she's actually their son's daughter, but as I understand it, they have custody. What's your advice on that? Because those kids are in that exact target, if you
Network.
will, target area, the area that could most be affected. What's your advice?
They need to leverage off of and prove worthy of their network. They need mentors. They need role models. They need people who will invest the time to really take over the mother and father role as best they possibly can and manage expectations. Uh, th- they need to ensure that things don't get worse. So unfortunately, there are people who they're in prison, their children miss them. They could succumb to drugs and temptation and bad choices without role models or parents to guide them. So as a family, they kind of need to say, what can we do to ensure that things don't get worse for her? Because she's our primary concern. To do that, you need a community. You need people to step in and really play a father or motherly role. And that's what I presume they're working on right now. And only then will they be able to really rest. Without that, the prison term will be very difficult. And it can be difficult to even gain some traction if you're so fearful and concerned about what's taking place at home. And as parents, I empathize with that. I'd be devastated knowing that my children are home alone without their mother. I mean, it's terrible. It's awful. And that's why I presume they also have a whole lot of regret over how they've managed this whole experience, right? How they both pled guilty. They probably would have she could potentially have avoided prison or gotten a very short sentence. He could have gotten 3 or 4 years. And before you know it, you're home and you're back on TV. The game has totally changed when you're talking about 7 and 12 years in prison.
Right, right. It has. And let's talk about why that happened. Because, some people wrote me and said, well, why did other people who committed pretty similar crimes, frankly, end up with much shorter sentences? So Chrisley's ended up with hefty sentences. Why is that? And I want to talk a little bit about sort of your philosophy about stepping up and owning what you did. And then, go ahead and tell me a little bit, tell the group, you and I have talked about it, but tell people who are watching a little bit about your philosophy about that. And then I want to talk about what the judge said.
So we're not lawyers. We don't dispense legal advice, but we've guided thousands of people through the system. And in our experience, we encourage people, if they've done it, to not walk, but run to the US Attorney's Office. The problem with many people is they don't view what they did as criminal. They think maybe it's civil. I didn't have bad intentions. Everybody was doing this. Or they have enablers that tell them that it wasn't wrong. So that's a problem. So part of what our team strives to do is help them understand how and why they cross criminal boundaries, the benefits of accepting responsibility. And that's the reason why people who may have done the same exact thing, someone may get 3 years, someone may get 10 years. The person that went to trial, what are they doing? They're forcing the government to use precious government resources at the expense of other cases to prove this case. Well, that's frustrating to the government. So that's the reason why someone can get 3 years, another 10. The person who got 3, well, what did they do? They quickly accepted responsibility. They identified with victims. They articulated a plan on how they're going to pay the money back. They lay out a vision for what the rest of their life looks like. Two fundamentally different paths. Unfortunately, people of power or wealth or prestige, or who have these enablers around them who tell them exactly what they want to hear, they think they're different. They think they're going to be the one that's going to prevail. And they may not understand the interests of all the stakeholders. I'm not indicting lawyers. I presume the lawyers might have given them good advice, though they should have fully understood what are truly the odds of prevailing. Have their lawyers actually ever prevailed at trial? You'd be stunned at how many people go to trial and hire a lawyer that's either never been to trial because the lion's share of people plead out, or two, their lawyers never actually won. Well, I'm going to be the first one. They think they're special and different. Guess what? When you're immersed in the criminal justice system, you're not. And if you don't accept responsibility and the US government thinks you're an unrepentant manipulator, they are going to fillet and punish you. And it's the reason he got 12 years, where if he'd have said, I'm sorry, this is my plan to do better, he'd have gotten 3 or 4.
And in this case, the judge really keyed in on exactly what you're saying. I mean, she said to the Chrisleys, you never admitted what you did. You never expressed remorse for what you did. And thus, I can't use that to take away from your sentence. I have to use that to add to your sentence, the fact that you don't seem to get it. She also said, for example, they wanted to have their terms staggered. So first, Julie would stay at home while Todd was in prison, and then they would reverse. They actually had requested probation entirely for Julie, which I thought was sort of a tone deaf
It's
request.
insulting. It's
Yeah,
insulting.
yeah. I mean, that was like never going to happen, and I mean, that was amazing that they even asked for that, because I thought that's something that's likely to just sort of get everybody upset on the government side and the judge. So I think that was a mistake, but the judge said, look, I'm not going to stagger your sentences. I'm not going to let you take turns on that, because you didn't think of the kids when you committed the crime. So why are they suddenly the top priority now? And she also said, in most cases, when I sentence people, there are kids who get left behind. That's pretty common. You are not unique in that. That's a problem for, generally speaking, parents who have kids and now they're going to be going to prison. And that sort of reaction, I think, is exactly because she was, I think it would have been different if they had come in with a different approach. So there definitely is a penalty for having pursued the trial.
There is no, in my opinion and experience in retrospect, had they both pled guilty, said, I'm sorry, public opinion would have come back in their favor because they can demonstrate how they're making amends. Their second chances do exist in this country, but not by blaming. You got to own it and lay out a path. They haven't done any of that. The sentences would have been shorter, and I presume the judge would have allowed them to stagger the sentence. It's very difficult to stagger out a sentence when it's 12 and 7 years. Like, okay, you're going to go to prison in 7 years. That's just sort of illogical. But had he gotten 3 years and she had gotten a year and a day, if I were a betting person, I'd have said, sure, the judge would stagger it at that case because he's going to be home. He could be home in 8. We've had clients in 36 months get home in 10 or 11 months. The sentences are far too long, but moreover, they haven't earned it. Our clients that have had staggered sentences, the judges believe you've proven worthy. You've accepted responsibility. You're laying out a path. I'm going to show you some additional liberty and mercy here, but they haven't earned it. And I've never gotten anything in life if I haven't earned it. You got to work, and they chose not to do any of that. And they're probably still in a little bit of denial right now, telling people, "Don't worry, we're going to win on this appeal. We got great grounds for an appeal, perhaps." And that's helping them sleep a little bit better at night. Though in reality, they know what's coming, 2 very long prison terms.
And I did a video on their appeal grounds on their argument that the IRS had sent someone who actually perjured herself on the stand.
Mm-hmm.
It was an unusual argument, and I thought it was stronger than your average. But the win rate on criminal appeals is so low. I mean, so low. It's truly amazing how low it is. It's very unusual. And I think you said you had experienced the same thing with people in prison.
It's very difficult to prevail on an appeal. Many people are delusional and believe the appeal is going to come in. And then if they're already in prison and they lose, the devastation really sets in, like, wow, I thought I would prevail. I'd be out here any day. Now I've lost. I have 12 years left to serve. So it just really requires resolve. They appear to be driven by their faith and their community, and they'll rely on that. Religious services in the Bureau of Prisons are pretty favorable. There's ample opportunity to participate in church services. And I think that's a good thing. And they'll find a lot of healing through that process. Communication can be difficult for them, though it doesn't mean they could get permission to write one another while they're both in prison. It appears, let me ask you, does it appear as if they're going to stay together through this, through thick and thin? They're staying married, they're a team. Is there any indication, one could leave the other, or does it appear as if this couple's going to stick through it?
I don't think, I don't
Yeah.
I don't have any inside information, but I did observe that when they've done interviews, they've done a podcast together, and they really seem to be pretty unified in their approach during that. So if I would say they have a better chance than most people of staying together, I would say this is a very difficult circumstance, and many marriages would suffer. Probably most marriages would suffer. But I think if anybody had a shot, I would say they have a shot, because I think they have really stuck together as they've dealt with this.
My first bunkie in prison, he was in prison, his wife was in prison, she got out. Their probation officer allowed her to go see him. I was in visitation that day, and it was a very emotional visit. But even if she gets out before him, she could get permission to go visit him in the prison after she has served her sentence.
That would be a reality show there. That would be
that will be filmed. They will film her going in and out of the prison.
That would be an amazing moment.
And the government will do what they did with Jordan Belfort and me. When the money comes in, they're going to take it for restitution, as they should. And it's a huge complexity with the money they owe, right? When you owe restitution, the government's on you for payments in prison, and when you come home, and they're going to watch every penny. And part of the reason they also got a longer sentence, by the way, was the post-offense conduct. I read there was some level of obstruction, or maybe she was hiding assets, or she didn't turn over the appropriate forms. That compels the judge to think, like, here you go again, you're in trouble. Now you're continuing to make bad decisions. You're just like a career criminal. There's no reform in you. So the post-offense conduct also really is off-putting to the judge, and it's part of the reason they got such long sentences.
Right. Well, what would be your words of advice to them? They're looking at lengthy prison sentences. They're looking at being away from their families, away from all of the things that they've ever known. What would be some words of advice you would give them?
To find perspective, that people throughout the centuries have gotten through worse. As a Jew, I identify with Viktor Frankl, who watched his family summarily get executed in the concentration camps, yet found value in every day in the blue sky. People have been through worse, and they need to find some level of perspective, and they need to create a realistic plan to grow their network, to prove worthy of a second chance. Because what happens to so many people is they come home from prison, all they want is to get out of prison. I want out, I want out, I want out. Then they get out and they realize, well, I'm not ready. The opportunities aren't here. Well, how am I going to sustain myself? Then many people look back with regret on how they served their prison terms. So if I were advising them, I'd say find perspective. People have been through worse. Work to prove worthy of the love and support of your family, and create a record on day one that you can defend. And that should include publishing and writing and documenting the journey. They should both write books while they're in prison. There's a whole lot that they can do to contribute and give back to this community of felons. Unfortunately, too many people go there and they fall into the depression and the hopelessness of this environment, and they never get started. And before you know it, they reach the end of their prison term and they're like, oh my goodness, what do I do now? So my advice, get going on day one. Get going right now, because eventually they're going to be home.
And when they do get home, what do you see as job prospects? I mean, is it
They're
all
going to be back on TV. They're going to be on your YouTube. They're going to be doing podcasts. They're going to be talking about, they're more interesting now. Now, felons aren't as interesting as we used to be because there are so many of them in this country, but certainly they're going to be interesting. They should talk about their experiences. They should talk about what they learned. They should talk about how they gave back and contributed to this community. I mean, they have a forum and platform that like so few people in prison have. Don't squander it. Don't waste it. They still have a potential multi-million-dollar brand in front of them, but it's not going to inspire people to watch if they continue to blame and excuse. They're just going to be forgotten about. We're going to move on to the next celebrity, and that's a wrap. So people will forgive them. It's never too late to begin preparing. But at some point, they're going to have to get it together and recognize the path they've been on ain't the best path, and it may be time to pivot. I just encourage them to do it sooner rather than later.
Their report date is January 15th.
Yeah.
What about the time between now and then? What's
it's
their
hard.
approach? I mean, they've got Thanksgiving with their family. They've got one last Christmas with their family. What's the best way to spend it? What can they do to help the family members who are going to suffer, frankly, when they go away?
They should be getting all of their affairs in order: power of attorneys, medical records, book lists, contact lists. They may be getting fired from their banks if they have not already, establishing banking relationships, assessing who's going to manage the family and take care of their children. So there's a lot of planning that goes in to this process. It's also it is a downtime. There's no way to spin that. The reality of the situation is sitting. They may be moving and just adjusting. In many ways, they're going to feel forgotten about. And also so many things they once valued, their TV show, their wealth, their car, their jet, their watches, whatever it may be, they begin to lose them or they're taken away from them. So they've got to identify and find new values, which can be very humbling. So the time between sentencing, while it's good to finally get sentenced and get clarity, between sentencing and the surrender to prison is a very hard time, because you feel like you're in prison, you're just not getting credit for it. Eventually people, once they're there, they're like, many of them say, I wish I got here sooner because I've been in prison for so long, I'm just not getting credit. So they have a lot of planning to go through as a family, and they should make every day count now and every day while they're in prison.
And speaking of credit, because I get a lot of comments like, oh, they got 12 years. Well, they'll serve 10 months and be out. But that's not reality in the federal prison system.
Unless the First Step Act, which President Trump signed in late 2018, they are technically allowed, they could be eligible to be released day one by way of the compassionate release, by way of the First Step Act. Is that logical? No. Is it likely? No. COVID still exists. There are many people who have been released from prison due to COVID and the CARES Act, which is not a law, but an executive order the Attorney General signed in, I think, April of 2020. So there are mechanisms, though it's very likely. A pardon or commutation, perhaps, really unlikely. So sure, the law allows that they could be released within 10 months. We would encourage them to advocate for themselves, to create a reentry plan and record that shows why they're worthy of an earlier release. But it's very unlikely. They should embrace the reality that they have many years in prison ahead of them, and they should be working to to prove worthy of the love and support of their family, because their little girl's little and they're going to come home. She's still going to be a little girl. She'll still be a teenager. She's got her whole life ahead of her. And I would encourage them to not let this be a defining legacy moment in a bad way. They could redefine their legacy, create, but you just can't do it by blaming people. It's not inspiring. It gets old, and eventually people will forget. And then if they feel forgotten and it's too late, then they come around, and eventually people are like, well, you're only telling this now because this is what we want to hear. You've had so long to get here. And in that case, you never win. That's why they need to stop wasting time.
This is great advice. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much. And I want to tell everybody, Justin, your YouTube channel is White Collar Advice. And tell us a little bit, you have a book available, and just give us a little bit of the information about your channel. Oh, and I always forget to say, please like and subscribe to this channel too. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. So Justin, tell us a little bit about where we can find you on the internet and your YouTube channel.
Thank you. So I contribute to content really on 2 platforms: on the White Collar Advice YouTube channel, where I interview clients. I share what I've learned through the system, perspectives like on this sort of case or Elizabeth Holmes case. So I'll offer my insights as someone who's traversed the system, as someone who's been to prison. I also do a lot of prison videos, do's and don'ts, from the perspective of a white collar defendant who served just a year in federal prison. I also talk a lot about life before, how to hold lawyers accountable, how to mitigate, how to prepare to get the shortest sentence, and really preparing for the other side, coming home. How do you repair your reputation in prison, publishing, things of that nature. So I do that through White Collar Advice on YouTube. TikTok, White Collar Advice is pretty cool. I do punchier, shorter videos there about prison. I try to use that platform to mentor and teach, because it's more of a younger audience. A number of those people may not be in the system. And in prison, I hand wrote with my business partner a book called Lessons from Prison. It's free. Don't buy it. If you go to White Collar Advice, you can opt in. I'll send you the PDF. Again, we're not going to try to sell you anything, but it's an easy to read book about how someone who had a lot of opportunity broke the law, the consequences of cheating. And I relied on dead philosophers to try to guide me through this very difficult experience. And I'm grateful to now have this business that's helped a lot of people since I went to prison in 2008.
I think even this video will help a lot of people.
I hope so.
I hope so too. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video.